Welcome back to It's Data Habibi, a podcast we've designed to explore challenges across the world of data and AI. And in the last episode, we explored identity resolution of just one example of what fragmented data can look like in organizations. But in this episode, we are zooming out because whether it's customer data, operational data, financial metrics, or AI models, the same question keeps coming up. Who actually owns the data, and what does data ownership mean, especially in large organizations? So for today's episode, we've got Stijn Christiaens, Collibra co-founder and chief data citizen, which is a data and AI governance platform, and a leader for the second year in a row, I think, in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So well done, Stan, on that. And we have Ben Coakley, a data governance leader with deep knowledge and experience in improving large retail organizations and how they manage and build trust in their data. So I'll let now our guests introduce themselves. So Stan, let's start with you.
Yes, Luke, thanks for having me over, first of all, and thanks for the partnership in the region. Very excited to soon visit, I hope. But yes, I'm Stijn from Collibra, one of the co-founders. We've been doing this for 18 years now. We are governance coneheads, I would say. Thanks also for the call out on the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We are leader in many of them, more than 2 years, and we're very proud of that. Also, of course, we're very grateful to be in that position. But more than the analyst recognition, I always take the recognition from customers to be the most important one. But I'm one of the co-founders, and my title is Chief Data Citizen, which maybe is a bit of a mystery what it means to most people. But very shortly, I run inside Collibra. I run our own data office. Right, this is where we practice what we preach. We use our own software. In the Monday mornings, we call it eating our own dog food. Friday evenings, we call it drinking our own champagne. But essentially, that's what I do. And then, as part of that role, I also share any learnings we have internally with our customers and the market. So, really looking forward to talking about the hot potato topic of data ownership.
Very good. Thank you, Stan. And Ben, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Luke. My first ever podcast, so I'm very excited to join you guys. Um, I'm an international expat. I've worked across the UK, Australia, and have been in the Middle East for the last 25 years. My background is in sports, retail, and wholesale, traveling around the whole entire MENA region for various sports brands, doing sales, merchandising, supply chain operations, and was lucky enough to be able to pivot my career around 6 years ago, being tasked with starting the data governance department. So it's been a very steep learning curve, but it's been a great journey so far, and I'm hoping to continue for many years to come.
Oh, great. And thanks to you both for joining us today. I'm looking forward to diving into those war stories that you both had when dealing with data ownership and getting your perspectives on this. So let's get in. Every organization says data is their most valuable asset. But when data is created across different teams, analyzed differently across different functions, and presented to leadership in varying formats, it isn't so much of an asset and it becomes more of a source of confusion. So today's episode, we're going to go into how data ownership shows up when decision needs to be made. What happens when data is widely used but poorly owned, and why data ownership becomes critical as organizations start to rely more on AI and roll out their AI solutions. So let's get in with data ownership 101.
Luke, and I'll pick
Yeah.
that up for you, if that's all right. And I do want to pick up on a thing that Ben said earlier in the introduction. He said that he was lucky to get into governance. So that's the first time I've heard that in my 18-year governance career. We'll have to talk about this, Ben. I'm curious. But welcome. And data ownership 101 for me, Luke, it's very simple. Let's talk about ownership first. People know ownership from, for example, their house, right? So you buy a house, you buy an apartment. Now you have taxes to pay. Now you have things to fix. So ownership means it comes with certain things you got to do. And when people get ownership thrown at them at work, all of a sudden it's a hot potato, right? But now, because they don't understand it, data ownership, what is this? And it comes with a 100-page slide deck, which is very confusing. And it looks like you're trying to give me work on top of work that I already have. So naturally they try to like move it on. Well, that's not for me. That's for the IT, or that's for somebody else. I'm sure it's important, but somebody else better do it. So for me, data ownership at its most high level is around, you've got the data asset, right, which is a relatively young discipline, let's say 10, 15 years old in the market. But organizations are used to managing other assets, the money assets, materials and subproducts and whatnot. So now they're learning what it takes to do that for the data asset, because that pressure in the market is only increasing. And it means you have a data asset, let's say a customer data domain, and then it means who is responsible for that, and for which things, and in which process kind of way, right? So you're sort of arranging things around the data asset. Let's take the example, Luke, of the customer data domain. Let's just say there's a customer data domain and we need to establish ownership for that. If it's missing, and let's say there's, an issue with customer contact details, then and there's a problem that arises from this, so invoices are not working or whatever else is going wrong. Now there's a problem in the company, right? And you say, well, who's responsible for fixing this? Customer data domain and then the contact details. If that answer is not determined, then it becomes almost like artisanal, right? People start figuring it out on the fly, ad hoc. There's some chaos that ensures, and there's finger pointing that inevitably happens, and then still the fixing has to happen. Whereas if you would have ownership established, then it would be clear if an incident occurs, what has to be done by whom, when, and how, right? Because you've sorted out the responsibilities and the process. And I want to be very clear about that, Luke. I mean, data ownership can sound like a scary big word, but depending on the organization that you're in, it can be very simple and agile, right? And ownership could be done by saying, for the customer data domain, we've got the data ninja role, and that role is played by Luke. So every time there's something with customer data, we're going to go to Luke. And that could be it, right? So very simply organized. All the way to maybe you're in a large, complex organization or a large industry, or heavy regulation, whatever it may be. And then maybe you need to establish ownership responsibilities at various levels, operational all the way to strategic, that could roll up even to a director level person, and everything in between. And then you have some more roles, maybe with some more responsibilities and some more steps in the process. So more ceremonial versus more agile. And essentially ownership spans that whole gamut in between.
Yeah, and I love that the analogy that you were talking about there as well, with this idea that actually people outside of outside of work are kind of going through this ownership piece and understand the ownership concept very well, but when they come into the office, it becomes that hot potato that they're kind of passing around. But to get started, it doesn't have to be scary. You can actually do it in a very simple way. But the important thing is to start. And Ben, I think you've got some good examples from your experience on this, and actually how organizations start to think about this.
Yeah, essentially the the way I started was by taking the ownership myself. So I became the gatekeeper for, again, we took baby steps, we took different verticals, different data domains. So we started with the sport articles, and I built the processes and the workflows and approvals to manage the creation, maintenance of the data through its life cycle. If any requests came, I would be the person who was contacted, and then I would speak to the various stakeholders if there was a change in the hierarchy or a new drop-down value required, etc. And then because that meant I became the expert. So that when it came to transferring that ownership, I knew exactly what it meant. From a workload point of view, from an accountability point of view. So it became a little bit easier once we crossed that bridge with the business. So that's
Yeah, and
one
I
way of doing
think
it.
yeah, exactly. And I think you've taken it on yourself to kind of kick that off within the organization. But how did you find it then from an accountability point of view versus having that kind of formal ownership? And what were the challenges there with that as well?
To be honest with you, we never actually. I had a team of data stewards who, as I said, we put in the data across our articles, vendor, customers, etc. We put all the validations in place to ensure, even before the data got created in our ERP system, that it was of a reasonably good value. Retroactively, we would then check that data as it's moved throughout our ecosystem. But what that meant is my lead data steward became the de facto owner. Um, so that he became then the point of contact, so that when we decentralized those data stewards into the business, he became, as I said, the de facto owner. In the meantime, I was working on the data governance policies to define the roles and responsibilities. And that's as far as we got. The next step would then be to officially name that data owner. And for me, you need to have it in the job description. When a job description, they say P&L ownership, there needs to be a data ownership actually in the HR system to say this person, as I said, is the accountable party. They decide what happens with their data. But that's the next step for me. We've not quite made it, but that's the strategy that I went with.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you talk about how that's given out as well, and then moving into that decentralization of data ownership. But I think one of the things that we see is um, there's this tendency for it to be looked at as an IT or technical ownership problem as well. And Stan, I think this is something that again we see regularly. And why do you think that is? Why is it that IT teams are often jobbed with this by the rest of the business?
Well, I can talk about that for a while, right? But I want to touch on something that Ben said first earlier, which is, that formalization, Ben, what you're describing. I mean, I love those stories, right? And formalizing them, like you said, the organization maybe changed and it decentralized, whatever happened. Now, let's say that this person that you say, okay, was a steward or the owner, the de facto owner, it's fine, right, for it to happen like this. But then it needs to become formalized, and formalization is not that complex, right? Because otherwise, let's say the person leaves, now you're back into that chaotic situation because nobody knows how to transfer it again. So the formalization is an important step, absolutely.
This is where you need to assign an ownership to a role, though, not a person, correct?
Exactly, yes. So I love that you're bringing in the HR responsibility there because, that's part of formalization in my opinion as well. With respect to the ownership being pointed at the IT boxes, Luke, that's all about the boxes. Data is the contents, but for most people, data is a very abstract concept, right? So they associate data with the box that it is contained in, right? So they'll say, oh, it's customer data. That's the CRM system. So whomever runs the CRM system is responsible. Or that's data that's coming from the data warehouse. They imagine some big rack or a data lake, a puddle of data somewhere. They don't even know what it looks like, right? Because we love inventing data jargon. And then because it's foreign to them or alien to them, they'll be like, well, it's in that data warehouse or lake or whatever it is box. And that box is managed by a technical person, right? There's probably some wizardry or some voodoo happening inside. So it's those technical people that probably know how to do it. So they have to own it. But then you put yourself in the mind of like a data engineer who's just trying to keep the lights on that thing, right? And all the pipelines are breaking and the consolidations are not working. And now somebody comes in because they saw customer data in the marketplace and say, I want that customer data. And they go to the engineer and then they ask, hey, data engineer, give me that, customer data. I want it for my, beautiful AI or analytics purpose. And the data engineer, they can easily give that permission, right? It's just a permission that they have to set on a table or whatnot. So that's easy for them to do it technically. But the data engineer knows, okay, but what am I doing here, right? So first of all, the company is 30,000 people. I don't know, right? So who is this person that is coming to ask me for this access to this data? How long will they need this data? What are they going to use it for? Am I allowed to set that permission for that person and that purpose? This technical person in this case just lacks complete context with which to make the decision to actually set that permission, yes or no. So they cannot take that ownership because they're just missing all of that background. But like I said, people confuse data with the box that it is contained in, and as such, it becomes an IT responsibility, which is, by the way, absolutely wrong.
Absolutely, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail. But Ben, I can see you wanting to jump in there.
Well, I was going to ask Dan a question actually. In his experience, how many tickets or requests would a data owner receive in a week or a month in a 30,000 a size company, employee size company, because that's the worry as well, is the workload that they're given. It's like, okay, I'm agreeing to access to, I'm getting 10 tickets a day, 100 tickets a day. I have to manually go in and approve, disapprove, feedback, etc. So I just, in your experience, how many requests would come?
Well, I think that the more of those requests happen, the better.
Sure.
Right, but obviously that means that data is getting used, right? That people are actually trying to make use of the data to make something better. But of course, if I would then put myself in the shoes of the owner getting like 10,000 requests per week, then that's not going to work either.
Sure.
Probably indicates that some policy just needs to be set. I'll give you an example, right? So you're in sales, you can access all the sales data. We don't need to individually approve every single request. We can just set that up through a policy and be away with all of those tickets. But I'll give you an example, Ben, from our internal setup, right? So let's say Collibra is about 1,000 people, roughly. I don't know the exact number by heart, but let's say about 1,000 people. And for about 5 years, well, 26 now, 6 years, we have our data office set up internally. As the company grew, that became more and more necessary. And then over that period of time, I probably have somewhere between, don't know the exact numbers, so don't quote me here, but let's say I have between 5,000 and 10,000 of those access requests operating on our data marketplace internally and on our data lake. So is that a lot? Is that not a lot? I think it's a nice number. I was happy to see it that high. But it's, again, this is fragmented. This is not one person fielding them all, right? Okay. Which would be normally all of those requests would go to those data engineers, right? Yeah. But because I've got the setup distributed with the ownership assigned, it just routes that request to the relevant person. So there's no single person who got all of those requests. And they're spread over a time period. So I would say it's rather, on a month or something like that, that any individual at any given time would have to be dealing with. It's not a heavy load at all.
Yes, I mean,
sorry, I was going to say, and that's one of the areas where, again, having the ownership just by default to the data engineers or within IT doesn't make sense, because again, if you have that distributed within the business, you're able to have the actual owners. They understand the business process. You're spreading the load of the request and the purpose and everything else. And then the key is going to be actually, how do you bring those dispersed data owners together? So, Ben, I think, again, in your organization, you had some challenges, with going from centralized to decentralized, and how did you kind of like manage this and create the structure to still then bring them together when they were decentralized?
Yeah, so it seems in my company, we've every sort of 3 years we go through a centralized, then a decentralized, then a centralized process. So it becomes very frustrating, to be honest with you. and we're still trying to figure it out. Which is one of the reasons, to the opening point, Stan, I like data governance, because it's such a new field that everyone is trying to figure it out, and there's no one size fits all. Every company is different. Where does data governance sit? Is it, as I said, a federated model, decentralized, centralized, etc.? So we're going through currently. I had them centralized under me, and as I mentioned earlier, I was sort of the owner of that, and we're just decentralizing them now. So I've done some work manually in Excel of looking at all the tables in our ERP system. I get access to all the employee hierarchies. So looking at all the tables, classifying them as I see them, as per the policy I've written into, classify sensitive, internal and public, which roles in the business I think should be responsible for the various data domains. And the idea was then to present that to the business. So it's basically, coming from a sales background, your job is to make your customers' job as easy as possible. So it's going with a ready-made plate of food, and they just say, "Great, I'll eat it." So that was what I was trying to do. The problem then becomes the hypercare afterwards. How do we actually record this ownership? I've currently got it in an Excel file, but how do you actually enact it? Which is sort of the next step. It's one thing saying you're an owner, but then the next step is, okay, well, how do you manage the decisions you've made on data access or on classifying that data? Maybe something has changed, maybe new data has been added, etc. So yeah, that's been my journey so far.
And Stan, that's probably a good topic for you to wade in on, right? Is around that management of that, and obviously given what you're doing in your role day to day. So, do you want to give us your thoughts on that?
Of course, and I also want to pick on that centralization, decentralization bit, because that's a common theme as well, as you can imagine. But I'm going to take you back to 2009 first, right? So 2009, you're looking at the first data governance conference started to show up. And I remember being at them, and I'm seeing people present about ownership and stewardship, and both of you have probably seen similar things with large slide deck and pyramids of responsibility. And I remember people's eyes glazing over because they're like, "Oh, this is a lot to digest. It's very conceptual and academic." So what I then started doing is saying, "Well, I want to make governance practical, right? So instead of the 100-page slide deck with confusing conceptual stuff, which is important, by the way, right? The theory is there, the frameworks exist. But I wanted to show to people, look, here's Collibra, and if you're a steward or an owner or a data ninja, whatever it may be, here's the button for you to click, the yes or the no, whatever it may be." And then it became very practical overnight. Because what Ben is describing with Excel, I mean, that's fine. That's typically how governance always starts. If the business is not tooled to deal with data governance, the business tools themselves. And that's the digital equivalent of WD-40 and duct tape, Excel spreadsheets and meetings and PowerPoints. And that works, to get something off the ground, that works, but it quickly hits all sorts of walls, right? Because, imagine the spreadsheet becoming so many cells with people collaborating. I mean, it stops working at some point in time. And that's why we built our software, right? So to support governance at scale in organizations. Now, with respect to the I also like, Ben, by the way, there's no single way of doing this. I keep saying this all the time. This is the same, by the way, with ERP or CRM. Every organization is different. So there is no single way of doing CRM. There is no single way of doing ERP. There is no single way of doing data governance. It is individualized to the organization, but also to departments within the organization or lines of business, or 1 year later, if there's more maturity, to a different maturity company. So it's like an operating model. You got to iterate it. But what I wanted to say about the centralization and federation part, right? So when I say to our customers, hey, we have a piece of software that helps you with governance, I'm sure they believe me and they start comparing features and functions, and that's fine. But I want to make a very clear message to our customers in the market. Our business is your governance, right? So that means we have a technology widget to help you, but we also have our whole company to help you, because we know that our customers will hit reorganizations, change of CDO, centralization that 3 years later turns into federation. And our business is supporting the customer throughout their data maturity journey, whatever obstacle comes along the way. And they have technical obstacles. Oh, the proxy didn't work with the connection to the database, and there's a new security thing. They have regulatory obstacles. They have cultural obstacles, like data governance is important, but it's somebody else's job. They have political, not government political, but internal political obstacles. They have so there's a lot of obstacles on the journey, and all of those obstacles we handle together.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Stan, the important thing is that we're creating the framework, the DMO within the organization that is in the right structure for the organization and its objectives, but ultimately to be able to tackle the challenges between, not just from a technical point of view and systems point of view, but also bringing in those people and those data owners and data stewards to be able to have the right discussions on the business data that a company is managing. And I think there's a lot of kind of misconceptions out there from business leaders on data ownership, and so kind of what do you think some of the kind of most common misconceptions are that maybe kind of business leadership has when we start talking about data ownership? And Ben, maybe you could draw on some of your experience for that one.
Well, I think Stan alluded to it earlier. I think the first one, as soon as someone sees data, they think complicated. They want it done at an arm's length by another team, and they just want it ready and of good quality when they want it, but managed by someone else. That's because, as you know, I come from the business. I'm responsible for the bottom right-hand corner number on a spreadsheet, and all I do is everything I try and do, from chasing customers, chasing payment, working with marketing and as I said, we got multiple verticals. So we're in the grocery business, we're in the pharmacy business, homeware business, sports business, etc. So when everyone from a support function wanted something from me, it was low on my priority, and data is one of them. So I think the one that it's complicated. As I said, it's seen as extra workload on top of my everyday work. Yeah, that's off the top of my head what I can think of. Yeah.
Very good. And Stan, what do you see when you're speaking with customers about those common misconceptions?
Well, the list is endless, right?
Yeah,
I love the ones like data governance is important, but it's somebody else's priority.
Yeah.
Data quality is important, but for later. You're gonna slow me down. The list is endless. But Luke, I think rather than coming up with more examples and they get more fun along the way, right? So happy to come up with more, but I think part of the issue, in my opinion, is also, quite frankly, to the audience here, is us, as in data people. Data people also make it a little bit more hard themselves for the business, because they'll be like, well, we have to invest in our data foundations, and that's a 3-year program. But the business has a quarter to make now, right? So there's this distance, and then you have the whole jargon, right? Data people love to come up with their own jargon and pull the business in. You learn our language, whereas I believe that we're better off as data people learning the language of the business, which
Absolutely,
is about money, right? So how do you turn data into a dollar, if you will? For which, by the way, MIT has a great framework based on decades of research in large organizations. So
Yeah.
all of these objections, Luke, just point to that there is actually a real need, that something needs to be done. And the organization will need to do it, because if they don't organize it formally, then the effort is just done anyways by the organization, right? Because there's going to be issues and things to deal with. So there's going to be more work and less result, as opposed to organizing the work a little bit better. It's just like with anything in an organization. If you set up a process for it, and make sure the process is tuned to the needs
Absolutely.
of then everything works smoother.
And I think your point there, and the worry about slowing us down. We're a fast business. We've got targets to hit. When we're having conversations with our customers, right? Well, actually, by going through this process, you're actually helping yourself to speed up. You understand your data more effectively. You know what you've got, where it is, what the quality is, and so actually, by going through this process, you can speed up those business operations and those new data products that we might want to be bringing, and other use cases that having a better understanding of your data can kind of open up to an organization. And I think, particularly when we're starting to get onto those concepts around AI that we're seeing now as well, coming up with business, and we can't have this discussion without throwing in the AI conversation as well, right?
So I'm going to pick on that right away, Luke, on AI, because obviously you always got to talk about these days, but this is an example where there's a distinction between the data people and the business people, right? So oftentimes I see data people going like, oh, AI, garbage in, garbage out, they'll come to us, right? And then when when the boss is like, do something with AI, they'll be like, well, this is now our time to shine. Hey, boss, we'll do it with AI, but first we got to invest in our data management foundation for 3 years. And the boss is like, well, I want the AI now because my kid is talking to the AI now. And they'll just discard you, because for a business stakeholder, please don't underestimate this. They don't make that connection that data and AI go hand in hand. For them today, for the whole world today, AI may as well be chat in a browser window, and that's AI. So tell me again why I would need to invest in my data foundations. How are these two connected? Because I don't see them as connected. So it's on us data people's job to say, constructively and collaboratively enter that discussion, right? Senior leadership wants you to do something with AI, jump on the opportunity, show something, and use that momentum to then show, well, if we want to do more of this, then we have to invest more in that too. Otherwise, this card house just falls down and flat on its face.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Ben, when you're kind of drawing on your expertise and using that data across the organization, what are those things that you're seeing in terms of enabling new use cases and potentially getting into those AI conversations because you have this better understanding of your data, better control on the data quality there?
Yeah, it's difficult for me to answer just because we became a very siloed business. So the analytics team across our ecom, different office, different part of town. I would rarely get to speak to them, understand what issues they're facing with regards to finding the right data. What is the quality of it? I never had that feedback loop system. I know, we had a nice data warehouse where all our data ended up in that they would have access to. But I never actually got that feedback, not just on AI, but building their dashboards, etc. So that's maybe it's partly my fault, but we couldn't even get that far. It was just so siloed.
And I think this is one of the challenges where we have, as organizations grow and become too large, not too large, but they grow, they spread out, and that can make some of these challenges kind of exponentially more difficult to be able to address, right? So, we need to have those conversations, break down those silos. But again, some of the challenges, Ben, that you saw because of that, and because of that organization getting larger, kind of, how did it enhance the problems?
So, I mean, one of the main problems we have is not answering the question directly was staff turnover. as well. So you're never speaking to the same person more than 5 times over the course, say every 6, 12, 18 months, they either have come in and left or moved department, etc. So it's having that consistency as well, to get that feedback, to understand where the pain points are with the data. As I said, we've just tried to front load all the validity of the data and create a ticketing system so that we have the freshest data possible. So any changes to the data, I created some SLAs with my team on a different priority levels, so that when those change requests came in, they immediately, well, depending on, as I said, they had a response time and a resolution time, so that when the data was consumed, fingers crossed, it was of the best quality. Now, across article, vendor, and customer, the data didn't actually change that much, from the initial creation stage. So the only one that I didn't get that involved in was the transactional data. Very versed in master data and reference data, but transactional was sort of done by the finance business partners, and it's an area that I found difficult to get involved in.
And was that because of kind of limitations from leadership in their understanding and the value of actually bringing some
I
of
would
this
say
together?
sort of the size of the business, the complexity of it. As I said, we've probably got 6 or 7 verticals, and within them we've got manufacturing, distribution, and retail. So, and we're across Africa, Asia, and GCC. And we're only a very small team. So trying to, pick your battles, or trying to, take the baby steps and, do, what with the low hanging fruits, what gives you the most rewards the quickest. So you can't boil the ocean is the quote that gets banded around. So where do you
I think
start?
you're onto something there, Ben, because in my experience, data offices are always scarce resources.
Yeah.
So let's say you're a 10,000 person organization, your data office might be 5. Right?
We
You're
had less.
100,000, maybe you're 20. Right? So it's always a scarce resource. And what I know about a scarce resource, if you want to make it effective in the larger organization, you have to be focused,
Yeah.
and you have to make sure that you're focused on the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I like what you said about picking your battles, because you're gonna have a spectrum from lovers of data who want to like do the best for data, to haters. So like, oh, data sucks.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna start making champions on the hater side, you're gonna have a hard time, obviously, right? So you just sequence them, and you start with the ones where the wins are easiest to be made, because in my opinion, then you've built out a few champions, right? That you've won their hearts and minds, you've shown them the way, and you've learned a little bit, and then you use those champions to get the next ones, and the next ones, and the next ones. And this is use case after use case, this is audience after audience, and that's a long journey. And the organizational pressure, centralization, decentralization, the turnover that you mentioned, these are all, they all affect it, right? But ultimately, you got to win hearts and minds of what we call all the data citizens in the company, and that's people who use data to do their job, which increasingly is everyone soon.
Yeah. Sorry, just going to interject. The interesting thing is what does AI mean to the business? Because when I look at the business sort of consumption of AI, it's from our data warehouse, and instead of getting a data analytic who can write their scripting to create a nice dashboard, you just go into a prompt like ChatGPT and you say, give me the sales for this gender in this city for this brand, and then within a couple of seconds, in a pie chart or a bar chart or whatever. That for me is what the business understands as AI. From an analytic point of view, it's just being it's what do you call it? It means that everyone can become an analytic and get the right information just using prompts rather than having those technical skills. That's what I understood from AI in our business.
And that's the challenge when we start coming into that, is that there's the expectation that we can, or from companies, that we just put in the AI tool, and without having any ownership or understanding of our data assets and what that looks like, you feed it in and I'm going to get the outputs that I want. And that's part of the education that we have to go through, to be able to kind of build confidence in our data foundations, to be able to put that into these tools and these kind of emerging use cases.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well.
Because I mean, let's be clear, the AI is a smart tool right now, right? They've trained it on the internet, it knows things. And they're making those systems better and better. So it's exciting. But at the same time, no matter how smart that brain is, if you will, it's lacking a lot of context for certain decision making, right? So to your point, Ben, about the AI, they're using it to, answer some basic queries, right? So then the question becomes, of course, well, how does it know which query to make, right? So which context does it need to pull in to understand which tables it needs to filter on, or not, right? Or how to aggregate things, and what definitely not to query. So there's a lot of context that you need to add into this brain so that it can make the right decisions for you. And I think that's, to your point, Luke, that's part of the education also that needs to be made to understand.
The interesting thing for me is when you do create these prompts, how do you know whether the data that's given back is correct? Now, if you're an intelligent business person, you've got, say, 300 customers daily in your store in Abu Dhabi is the example I gave, but when you get the prompt back and it shows 1,000 customers, because you're an experienced retailer, that's incorrect, or some nuances like that. But if you didn't have that, you would just take it verbatim and make your strategic decisions based on that. So that's sort of the more interesting thing. That's where you need to get the foundation right that you mentioned, and your data management areas.
Yeah, and I love that example, Ben, because if you have a responsible, savvy business person, they will sort of filter that out themselves. As an organization, you can't count on everyone being that responsible, savvy business person either, right? So I compare this historically with what happened with BI first. So we had like enterprise BI was too slow. And as a consequence, the market responded with self-service BI. Like everyone can make their own little dashboards. And what you got as a consequence in organizations was a proliferation of reports. So now if you ask the question, how many customers do we have in the store? There were probably 5 reports and they might all have 5 different answers. It became a trust problem. Now, what AI will do, it will exacerbate that proliferation even more. Because to your point, it's not just somebody's building a self-service BI little dashboard, but it's more people doing more of those prompts. So every prompt, every answer is like its own mini on-the-fly report. But it just means that understanding that trust problem is getting bigger and bigger. So that requires that there's more of those quality controls, there's more of that context, there's more of that responsibility. That all needs to be established. Otherwise, the decision making is just going to go all over the map.
Absolutely.
And definitely a lot of that is going to be wrong.
Yeah. And, I think, like say, is if you get the basics and the foundations wrong, everything you build on top starts to, get more and more likely it's going to come crashing down the higher up you go. So, get the foundations in place first. So, just to move on then. So, a question to Stijn. When we're talking about all of these subjects, kind of what are those most common kind of like wake up moments, aha moments for, organizations to go, okay, yeah, we need to get on top of our ownership?
I think there's a variety of drivers, right? So please, forgive me for starting with this one, but I'll start with that in a way. But there's a regulatory driver. So if there is a regulatory driver in your space, and as much as I don't always like regulations, please don't, let this, sense of urgency and budget creator driver go away either. Right. So look to the regulatory space and say, okay, which applies and which can help us drive the organization to push. So that's That's one. Then you typically have the example where there's actually somebody on the upper senior levels who understands. Maybe they've done it before a few times, and they know if we don't do this the right way, I'll have all sorts of problems or business. So oftentimes it can be a great leadership that sets that tone, which you're starting to see more and more of because of this AI phenomenon. I'm now actually seeing that there are CEOs and executive leadership teams that are choosing to take 2-day workshops on how to do data. Right, so this is starting to happen. It's early
Yeah.
days, but it is starting to happen. So it can come from there, and then you have the inevitable something's going wrong situation, right? So
Yeah.
something broke somewhere in the business, and then people sort of wake up. Oh, we got a problem, and then they start doing, well, what is the root cause analysis? The 5 whys. Why did we have this problem? And then it turns out, well, there was no ownership. Nobody felt responsible for looking after this data, and the whole supply chain down the road got broken. So incidents help create that driver just as well. But they're just one, right? So if it's just a single incident, it can also be like a sizzle.
Yeah.
If there is an
And
incident, you leverage it to say, this is why we're doing this. A new incident comes, as you say, this is why we have to keep doing this.
yeah, and I think as well, back to your point on the first one that you started with, the governance. So customers will approach us and say, we're doing this because of governance, but it's wasted expenditure. And one of the important things to stress is that, well, no, actually, if we're doing this in the right way, you having better understanding of your data is only going to lead to benefits for you as an organization across the organization. And you'll be compliant as well. You'll have better understanding, better management, better governance. All of these things will come from it, and you can enable these kind of other exciting use cases, like some of the AI use cases that the organizations might be planning for as well. And I think again, and Ben, over to you. Kind of like, again, that lack of ownership in large organizations. Where have you seen some of those challenges kind of flare up in conversations with the leaderships, or where it's impacted, or they've realized that they've then got challenges as a result of this?
Yeah, I'm sort of, thanks for the question. I'm just going to follow up as well on Stijn, because it kind of ties in on having a proactive approach, a regulatory approach, and a reactive approach. Sort of very few companies are that proactive on that. It's either regulatory or reactive in my experience. So the fact that GDPR arrived in the region, starting with PDPL in Saudi, meant that 3 years ago we had to implement it. And that by its definition created owners, because we had to find our PII data, whether it's in our CRM system, in a data warehouse, etc. Then you'll start going into your data lineage, finding out where that is. Then and then actually, okay. From a customer point of view, consent management, cookie management, etc., and then your DSRs. So now, as a governance department, I'm part of the data privacy office. So I am the gatekeeper again for the DSRs. So we have the asset owners where those data is residing. So I wouldn't say so. I would say it's a sort of hybrid data owner, where because of the regulatory approach, the customer data that is in a particular system, the IT owner owns that. So I go to them to ensure that it is deleted within the 30 days. So having the regulation in place, I know you said it's against it, Dan, but from a governance point of view, it makes my life so much easier because it has to be done. Rather than that reactive approach where you're sort of chasing your own tail, because now we have owners of the data. So that sort of answers sort of both those questions, I suppose.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for that, Ben. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're actually going to move the conversation on a little bit. So this is the part of the podcast where we'll go into Habibi fix this. So this is the part of the conversation where we're going to set a scenario and you'll each get 60 seconds to come up with a solution to that scenario.
Oh, stress.
I forgot about this.
So, yeah. So, I'm going to start with this. A central data platform serves the entire organization, and due to repeated issues with reporting, varying metrics, lack of visibility across functions, data quality issues, leadership has decided it wants stronger data governance processes in place. But the teams are pushing back, saying that governance and having extra governance in place at this stage is going to slow us down. So, in 60 seconds, tell us what you would do to address this and why this is the wrong assumption. So, Stan, let's start with you.
Well, sounds like those people have issues and they feel like they need to put gasoline, so they need to push on the gas, which will give them more issues faster, right? Because they want to go faster. But it sounds like, if they want to go faster and actually finish the lap, as opposed to hitting and crashing against the wall, they need to learn to, operate the gas and the brakes. Both of those are governance, by the way. And all they want to do is hit the gas, but they're full of issues. So their problem is only going to get bigger.
Yeah, I love that. Very, very simple solution there in terms of, actually you can do the wrong thing faster and you're just going to make more mistakes along the way, right? So actually sometimes taking that breath to actually look at how you do it properly is going to give a much better result. So that's very well put. I love that analogy there. So Ben, same scenario over to you. Do you want me to read it out again? Or are you good to get straight
it's okay.
in?
But a similar kind of analogy. My very first job out of university was data entry. Now, if you try and go as fast as possible and enter in as much data as possible because you have KPIs or something like that, you will get it wrong. You will make typos or mistakes. Now, to undo those mistakes takes you 4 times longer. That was the start I remember given in the 90s So why don't you go slow, steady, professionally, and get it right the first time, so you are not making, undoing your mistakes. So that would be my very quick reply to the business, which is why you need to standpoint, have brakes on the car so you can go faster.
I like that a lot, Ben, because it reminds me of you were once in China on Wangshan, which is the Yellow Mountain, and it's all carved out with stairs. And then you would see, these young guns like chasing stairs, but you're talking about probably 1 or 2 kilometers up, right? So it's a long walk up.
Yeah.
And if you would see the ones who go fast, and they're 100 meters later you see them
out of breath,
huffing and puffing, and they're not moving anymore. And then you had these older gentlemen and gentle ladies that were just steadily walking up those stairs, and they passed by all of those fast ones easily, and they weren't even exhausted or anything. It reminds me of your data entry story.
Yeah, and from my point of view on that as well, one of the things we like to talk about with our customers is let's understand where we are and let's move forward with that conscious purpose. We have that clear understanding of our environment, the data assets that we have. And so, if we need to resolve some of those data issues, we know about it now rather than finding out later as well. So no, that's great. Thank you both very much for that. So in today's episode of this podcast, we have talked about a whole range of topics on data ownership across organizations and the importance of it. And some of the risks and why it's going to impact businesses being able to go forward, especially in the era of AI now as well. And so we need to start off getting the foundations in place to be able to go faster, to be able to embrace some of these new capabilities. So final takeaways from you both. Ben, let's start with you.
For me, I think data ownership was one of the hardest things to get right. Like when you look at data quality and metadata or etc., it's technical. You can it's engineering, and you can figure it out and make the metrics, etc. But with ownership, you're dealing with people, and people have feelings, and and we all have a job to do. Now, taking on extra responsibility, some people want it, some people don't want it, but it's as I said, trying to be as transparent, clear as possible. To the point earlier, Stan, what volume of work does it mean to them with regards to approving a number of tickets, etc.? Are they approving and disapproving access? It's just, what does it mean to them when you are handing them the ownership? That's what you need to be as clear as possible. And the final thought, you need to have executive sponsorship. That's one thing that I found difficult without that approaching the business. It's got to come top down. Trying to do it bottom up does not work, in my experience.
Yeah, very good. And Stan, final thoughts from you, please.
Well, on the points that Ben made, I agree. The executive sponsorship, good executives today are educating themselves on data, so they will understand it. Otherwise, they might find themselves not such great executives for the. But when it comes to closing thoughts, Luke, I'm Belgian, right? So as you know, Belgians love their fries and their mayonnaise. So when somebody throws you the hot potato of data ownership, as opposed to trying to, throw it further to somebody else, just catch it, turn it into fries, put some mayonnaise on it and eat it. You might find out that you like it, and definitely it's going to be good for your organization.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you very much, guys. And so that wraps up today's episode of It's Data Habibi. So if what we've been talking about in this conversation today has resonated, make sure you subscribe and share it with someone in your organization who's dealing with data accountability, governance, or even looking at those AI projects and is maybe struggling to get some of those off the ground. So you can watch this episode on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, wherever else you might get your podcasts from. And all the links will be down in the description. So thank you very much, Ben, Stan. Thank you very much for your time today. And it's been brilliant having you as part of our podcast today.
It's been a pleasure. Have a great weekend, everyone.
It's Luke.
Cheers.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.